Very proud of what you're doing, and I think it's much needed. So thank you so much for your contribution.
Thank you again for watching the Bubb Report. Viewers and listeners, we want to thank you sincerely. Ashley, thank you so very much. Senator Chester Humphrey, welcome to the Bubb Report. Mr. Mitchell, welcome to the program. The Honorable Jumani Williams, we call him Jumani, who is the public advocate for the city of New York. The Honorable Baz Diopande, former Prime Minister of the Republic of Trinidad and Tobago. Mr. Pandey, welcome to the Bubb Report of Grenada. The Honorable Tobias Clement. Mr. Clement, welcome to the Bubb Report. Is it Nicolai or Nikolai? I hope I pronounced it.
Nikolai.
It's Nikolai. Thank you.
Yes.
And welcome to the program, Her Excellency Ambassador Luan Gilchrist. Ms. Randall Robinson, you are here in your private capacity and in your personal capacity. Yesterday, we learned that you were detained by law enforcement in Grenada. So you come from a family of public servants.
Yes, we are a family of public servants.
You're saying that you have to do more, but my question is, what have you done as President of the Union to ensure that happens?
To the cards that I have drawn, that I am the minister at this point in time. And for members of the public...
But you're also a servant of the people. Why would we have ambassadors representing the state that do not understand clearly what their terms of reference are?
Hello and welcome to the September 17th edition of the Bubb Report. I am Rion Charles. This week on our program, we take a deep dive into the state of Grenada's school curriculum to uncover the extent to which educational policymakers are teaching Indigenous Grenadian history and culture in the nation's schools. Former Grenadian educator and professor at McGill University in Canada, Dr. Lorana Lewis, said in a 2022 publication, quote, "The education system in Grenada continues to be shaped by the colonial history and religious authority of its origins. From its inception in the early 18th century, access to education reflected class, racial, and ethnic satisfaction associated with French and British colonialism and nationalism. Today, every Grenadian child has equal access to education. Schooling is compulsory for students between the ages of 5 and 16. However, questions arise about equity and inequality in education provision and attainment based on class, gender, disability, and socioeconomic status." Unquote. In the paper, which was co-authored by Oliver Benoit and Lennox Lewis, they call for a reimagining of the current education system. This week, we attempt to do so by speaking with a historian and an educator about the current state of local education in schools. Also on the report, we discuss the state of juvenile justice in Grenada against the backdrop of the myriad of challenges that orphaned young people face once they are phased out of group homes and other juvenile facilities, such as the Grand Bacolet Juvenile Detention Center. According to the local charity Reach Within, some of Grenada's youth live in abandoned buildings and under private verandas. A survey that conducted found 66% of the young men between 16 to 22 were involved in smoking and alcohol use. Some also turned to a life of crime. We welcome our guests, historian and educator Dr. Nicole Philip Dow, Kenny James, educator and trade unionist, Curlin Campbell, investigative journalist, and Andy Matthew, social worker. Here now is our host, Dr. Kellon Bubb, with this week's editorial titled Jonty's Closure. We thank you for joining us.
Hello, everyone, and we welcome you to this week's episode of the Bubb Report. Now, later today, the Royal Grenada Police Force is expected to officially charge a suspect in the murder of Josiah Jonty Robinson. Now, Jonty's case has brought much attention locally and internationally against the backdrop of the many documented instances of homophobic attacks he endured during his short life in Grenada. Jonty himself articulated that he received death threats from citizens who meant to do him harm. He was also physically attacked on Wall Street in the Grenada area, resulting in severe face injuries. Now, his murder certainly polarized the national community, and one hopes that during the course of the trial, that the suspect and the motive comes clear, that the facts behind his death would be made known. This will be important for closure. Bringing closure to families and friends of victims in tragedies like these is of significant importance. Jonty's unsolved case for the last few months left loved ones and friends in a state of uncertainty and grief. But closure is essential for families and friends to process their grief and begin the healing process. When a case remains unsolved, there can be a lingering sense of anguish and unresolved emotions. Obtaining answers and understanding what happened can help individuals find a sense of peace and acceptance. Closure often means identifying and holding those responsible to account for their actions. By solving this case, the law enforcement can ensure that justice and accountability takes place in this matter, and promoting a sense of fairness and reinforcing faith in the criminal justice system. It also acts as a deterrent for potential criminals, and it demonstrates that the legal system remains committed to resolving unsolved crimes. Unsolved cases can create fear and anxiety within communities, as it did in this case. Resolving these cases brings a sense of closure, not only for the immediate families and friends, but to the national community as well. It allows communities to regain a sense of security and trust in the legal system. Solving cold cases provide valuable insights into investigative techniques, forensic technology, and patterns of criminal behavior. This knowledge can aid law enforcement agencies in their efforts to prevent similar crimes in the future. But closing cold cases and unsolved crimes, investigators can also potentially identify patterns or connections that can help prevent or solve other crimes in the future. The big caveat here, of course, is that all suspects are innocent until proven guilty and are entitled to constitutionally guaranteed due process rights before the court. Now, may Jonty's soul continue to rest in peace, and may his memory be a blessing. And at this time, we are happy to be joined by Mr. Kenny James, who is a trade unionist and educator. We are still waiting on Dr. Nicole Phillip Dow to join us, but the show must go on. She said she will be here shortly, so we're looking forward to that. But Mr. James, as an educator, of course, the first part of your program today would be speaking to what I title as Decolonizing Grenadian Education, against a backdrop of the launch of the new textbook for it's called A Junior History of Grenadian Schools. I want you to react, Mr. James, to that textbook that was recently launched as an educator. I think we're having some issues there with Mr. James' internet. So what we're going to do, we are going to take a quick break here and come back and wait on Dr. Dow to join us for this first segment. So please stand by.
listeners, I see Michael already smiling. He anticipates what I would say. My good friend.
Yeah. And I put my head on a block, and I offer Mr. Brother Bishop the scalpel to cut it off.
The political leader has said several times up to last night that is not a reflection of her personal views or the views of the party. And you understand, George, how elections at the party level work.
So, Dr. Pei, do you have ties? Do you have ties to the National Democratic Congress, Dr. Pei? Or rather, were you commissioned by the NDC to do this poll?
Information because it seems interesting that a lot of your advice is very consistent with what was said. Brilliant.
And good luck with everything.
You too, man. May the best candidate win in the town of St. George.
Kill on.
Yes.
You is a tough man too, so stop it up. Tell everybody you are a tough man too.
We are a people who have always aspired for more, who've always aspired to do better, who've always accepted that not because your mother didn't go to secondary school, you should go. It has always been the other way around. You should aspire.
You've been there for a long time. Want to be queen of St. Andrews, but yet the problems around you you're not seeing. You can pray yourself out of the problems in St. Andrews.
And if you're not careful with how and what you say on radio, you will cause people to fight here.
I thrive on that controversy. Some people hate it, but I love it. In other words, every time something goes viral, it's about Kem Jones.
Some persons were getting pension after 2 terms in office, right? And the persons that work for 26 years plus not getting anything. It's just unfair.
God is good, and God looks after me. Not just my wife is no longer here, so both herself and the father up there are looking after me very, very well indeed.
Not a few people that you pick up by the side of the road to run in an election. These are not people that you mustered up and you pulled together a few months before you think an election is going to call, and you say we want to win an election, so let's come together.
And welcome back, viewers and listeners. We are now joined by Dr. Nicole Phillip Dow. Thank you, Dr. Phillip, for joining us today. And Brother Kenny, we are still having some issues there with your internet. So we are going to try and press through nonetheless, because we really can't hear you that well. We really can't hear you that well. So Dr. Phillip, welcome to the Bubb Report.
Thank you and good morning.
Absolutely. Now, of course, you have been getting, shall we say, rave reviews in respect of the recent launch of your textbook. Now, one of the rave reviews just came in from one of our viewers here, Mr. Nigel Gravesandy. I'm sure he's someone you're familiar with. He said, I want to publicly commend Dr. Nicole Phillip on her latest publication of a seminal work on Grenada's history. On the heels of the scholarly work of George Brizan, this important historical work is both timely and necessary. Undoubtedly, Dr. Phillip's work will form part of the historiography of Grenada, as gleaned through the lens and perspectives of a Grenadian. We must build on this work and move with alacrity to have history taught as a compulsory subject throughout the secondary schools. I want you to react to Mr. Gravesandy's comments here.
Dr. Gravesandy is a friend and colleague. Yes. And actually my first book, Women in Grenadian History, he would have done some work on the blurb and the forward and all of that for me. So I'm very grateful to him. This work does form part of Grenada's historiography. In other words, the work that has been written on Grenada thus far, it forms part of it, and it's special because it's catered to lower secondary schools students. So students anywhere between age 11 and 13, the book was written specifically for them. And the rationale is that they did not have anything that they could just pick up and read. And one of the problems that we have with children nowadays is just reading. They don't necessarily like to read. So you wanted something that was engaging They can pick up, they can read, they can answer the questions. There's lots of photos, lots of exercises, something that would grab their attention. And that's the reason why it's written that way. So it starts from as early as, well, the Amerindians, but first of all, we look at basic things: identity, personal identity, Grenadian identity, your identity in your school. Why do we study history in the first place? How do we get information on history? So how do you go about the whole process? And then we go from Amerindians right up to 2022. So it's a long span in a short space of time in a short book. Yeah.
How is this particular work of yours different from what was produced by the likes of Beverly Steele and George Brizan, who have also published extensive literature on Grenadian history?
Beverly Steele and George Brizan. 1 second, there's someone knocking on.
Yes, we'll give Dr. Nicole Phillip that was second there. But Mr. James, let's see here. It looks like your internet seems to be working much better now. So we'll wait for Dr. Dow to come back. But the question I posed to you initially was, how do you react to this new body of work? Of course, one of the challenges that I've always personally had in respect of the Grenadian education is that it's still steeped in colonialism. It's still steeped in anti-Black racism. Quite frankly, it's still steeped in denigrating the native peoples of Grenada in the context of framing them as cannibals. And framing Christopher Columbus as this great navigator who discovered Grenada, when in fact he was a mass murderer. He was a genocidal mass murderer. So how would this book assist in getting us to decolonize how we think about ourselves?
Morning, Dr. Bubb, and morning to all the viewers and listeners to the Bubb Report and my fellow panelists, Dr. Dow. Dr. Bubb, we are at a nice place. We are at a good place. We are at one of the best places that we can be, having a local historian documenting our history. A lot of what, as you correctly said, a lot of what we use in the school system, a lot of what we were taught was history written by the white man. And the written work is going to reflect the biases of the writer. It's going to reflect what the writer wants you to know. So take, for example, when we hear that all of the Kalinago people jumped off the cliff at Leapers Hill, the question is, understanding the geographical makeup of Sotés, would every single Carib or Kalinago man go to that specific area and jump off? Or is it possible that many of them went on to St. Vincent and eventually on to Belize? Because there's a great connection between the indigenous people of Belize and those of St. Vincent, and by extension, Grenada.
Yeah,
that's right. That's right. So having this body of work places us in a good place to start to educate our population on the truth of our history, the realities of our history, what we really should know, written from our perspective, written from our background.
Absolutely. And Dr. Dow, I hope you are unimpeded now.
Yes.
So please proceed.
Yes. Beverly Steele's work and George Brizan's work were excellent works on Grenada that would have definitely been needed at that time. I think the difference is, of course, they would have spanned right up to, give or take, 1983. This text goes a little beyond that. It goes beyond that. It goes up to present time. That's one. But the point is that the two other texts could be used as reference. But for a student of the 11 to 13 year age group, they cannot pick up either one and just read. It's going to be a little bit difficult. It may be easier to read Beverly Steele's own than it would be to read George Brezan's own. But for a student, for example, who is in 4th and 5th form about to write CSEC, George Brezan's and Beverly Steele's will work very well for them because they are at a higher level. This particular text, Junior History of Grenada, is specific because you want, I think for me as educator, as historian, as mommy, I wanted something that a student would easily gravitate to, would really want to see it and want to read, to be very much engaged. So it is specific to that age group because my point is wanting them to love history. I really want them to love history, to understand about themselves, understand about their country, their place within their own country is extremely important that they understand that. So the other two texts will be used as, you can use them for further reading, but this one is to get them engaged.
Let us peel off the layers here in respect of the research and the background work that was done for this text. Can you talk about the partnership that was done with the Ministry of Education? We were supposed to have a representative of the Ministry of Education here, but regrettably, the Ministry of Education declined to send someone. But talk to us about the work that was done with the Ministry of Education in putting this work together.
Okay, so the idea for the text has been around for a very long time. We say about 20 years ago, there would have been conversations with persons, including Dr. Beverly Steele when she was alive, about the possibility of a text. But with time, it petered out, it faded into the distance. For this particular text, I would have worked with Collins Publishers and on their social studies text for the Caribbean. And the layout of it I liked. And I would have spoken to the chief editor and asked her, is it possible to do something like that for Grenada? She agreed, but noted that you must have the endorsement of the Ministry of Education to do this. And that's where the ministry came in this case. So we reached out to the ministry, both myself and the editor, to ask for the endorsement. And the process started under Minister Pear, Minister Emmeline Pear, and would have been quickly picked up by Minister Andrew. In fact, in 1 week, he was able to answer and say, yes, let's move. Let's do this one time. So it was really hard. It was really heartwarming to get the endorsement, because the text itself was actually written. We were just waiting on the ministry to say, yes, go ahead. Yeah. So that's the collaboration. The good side of it as well is that the ministry, in having this agreement, took it one step further and said, okay, the text is now, we now have the text. We are going to make history mandatory, all right, in the lower secondary form 1 and 2. They worked on a curriculum alongside what is in the actual text. And we would have held a workshop. Mr. Kenny James was part of that workshop with the teachers during the summer session. They got complimentary copies of the book from the publisher. So we chatted with them about the book. They now have their curriculum, which I understand from the ministry was given to them earlier this week. So they have the curriculum or the scope and sequence of how they're supposed to teach. And that is the sort of partnership that happened between the ministry and myself. Mr. Brave Boy was excellent. I would have given him the text. He would have read through it, showed me spots where we needed to beef it up, especially at Garriku. And he would have.
We're talking about Junior Brave Boy here.
Brave Boy, yes.
My good friend, Junior Brave Boy.
Yes.
From Carriacou, yes, that's right.
So he made sure, that we had all Carriacou bases covered. And he got a number of teachers as well from across the island to look at the textbook to make their comments, things that may have been left out, things that I may not have thought about. So it was really a collaborative effort when we got down to the actual editing, because the writing is one thing, but when it comes to the editing of it, to make sure you have everything, they really came through and really worked hard on that aspect of it. So that's the collaboration with the Ministry of Education.
And I'm going to bring in Mr. James here again. Mr. James, of course, you as an educator, you know the function of the curriculum division within the ministry. Talk to us about what you have been hearing from the curriculum department in advance of the publication and distribution of this text into the secondary schools in Grenada.
Well, Kelon, first of all, let me commend the ministers, the past minister and the current minister, for signing off on this. And I want to back up a little bit to give a little context. In 2017, CXC commissioned a history task force after looking at the fact that the number of students taking history across the region was decreasing significantly. They put this task force in place, headed by Professor Alan Colby from UWI Barbados. And one of the recommendations coming out of this task force, I sat on the task force representing the Caribbean Union of Teachers and Grenada, of course. One of the main recommendations coming out of this was that we should have history taught both at the primary and at the lower secondary level. And I am happy to say that our Ministry of Education has hitched onto this wagon, lock, stock, and barrel. We have moved from not having a curriculum officer for history. The last one we had was Brother George Wilson, God bless his soul. The Lord took him home. But he was a man who was passionate about history, former principal of Shaper. He was a man who was, yes, he was passionate about history. And since he retired, we didn't have anybody really leading history in the Ministry of Education. Now, at least, Mr. Braveboy, with his specialization in social sciences and social studies, has taken up the mantle and has begun to do some work. And what we're seeing today is the fruit of that. Dr. Dow referred to the workshop sessions that we had over the summer. And it was an excellent opportunity to engage with fellow history teachers and to share with them perspectives. There were some people who would be teaching history for the first time. Some of them may have done history in secondary school, but after that, they didn't do anything else. And so it was a wonderful opportunity to engage with them on strategies, to engage with them on bringing history alive. Because very often when you talk about history, somebody tell you that's a dead man science.
A dead man science, that's right. but not only is it the dead man science, there is always the perception that history was always about retelling dates and months and years.
That's right. That's
what it was about. You know,
that's right. There was little focus on the fact that this is one of the subjects that opens your mind to analysis.
Absolutely.
This is one of the subjects that opens your mind to your creative juices. Because just to reimagine how a situation may have played out, or how it played out, and the environment at that time, that is a whole lesson in itself, right? And so when we talk about history, we're talking about something that's living. It's a living science. And so it was wonderful to engage with these teachers, to get them to understand that and to get them to be energized to going forward. Now, this is something I believe must continue. It cannot be a one-shot, but we need, because it's new, we need to continue to engage with the teachers. We need to continue to empower them. We need to get them to collaborate with each other. Because what I have found over my years in education is that for every teacher, there are some topics that you're strong on, and there are others that you may not be strong on. Now, if you're able to get a colleague who is strong on the topic that you're not strong on to assist you, then eventually you can develop your strength in that area. So the collaboration among our teachers is of extreme importance as we move forward with this initiative.
Absolutely, and I'm glad you mentioned teachers because Dr. Dow, you not only wear the hat of a historian, you're also a member of the Grenada National Reparations Committee. And of course, one of the subcommittees of the Grenada National Reparations Committee is the Education Committee. How do we get teachers excited? It's one thing to get the students excited about history, but it's another thing to get your teachers excited, right? As Mr. James just articulated. How do we, with the work of the Reparations Committee with this textbook, how do we get teachers excited for teaching history?
I think one of the things that came across in the workshop that we would have had with the teachers, and as Mr. James is saying, it has to be continuous. We can't just stop with the one that we would have done over the last vacation period. One of the things that came up was that the teachers themselves, for some of them, they were like, why am I here? I'm supposed to be on my vacation. And the good thing is, by the end of the day, they were so happy that they actually came, because they were now for the first time getting something that they didn't have before. And for a number of them, it was, okay, I'm starting to feel excited about this in the way that it's presented, in the way that it's portrayed. I think I could get the students on board. Yeah. So for us, it was raising their excitement. We tried to emphasize that you have to get students out of the classroom. Yep. Don't just sit with a textbook in the classroom. There's so many different exercises you have, so many different things you can do to get them out of the classroom, to have fun with the students, so that learning becomes fun. I think we emphasized that learning can be fun. I think one of the activities in one of the units, we asked them to cook, to make oil dung, make bakes. You know, if we're looking at the legacies that would have left for us by our African ancestors, and you've taught it in the class, you've gone through it, now it's time to actually do something. So let's see the children make fry bakes. Let's see them do bakes, even if it's over firewood. Yeah. So you get them into the feel of what life would have been like then, of how to use what they have. This is Grenadian. This is something that they know. You're linking the connections between our love of flour and dumpling back to our ancestors in terms of the food that the enslaved Africans would have actually eaten. So it's about showing these connections and getting students excited about the subject. Yeah,
bringing it alive. Absolutely.
Yes, bringing it alive. Bringing it alive.
Experiential learning. Yeah, absolutely. Now, let us talk about, because of course this is history. In the context of CXC, and Mr. James, I'm sure you can answer this. In the context of the Caribbean Examinations Council, how does this textbook, or how would teaching local elements of any of the territory's history in schools, how does that, I suppose, dovetail with what CXC's mandate is for ensuring that material is standardized for when the students are taking CXC exams?
Okay, what would happen here, or what is happening? The CXC program at the secondary level, for history, normally starts at Form 3. And this is why we now have a lower school curriculum. Because when you get to Form 3, that's when you start to engage with the CXC curriculum directly, and you would study various themes in the CXC curriculum, right? Now, what would happen here now is that a student willing to go forward with history, so for Form 1, Form 2, every student will have exposure to Grenadian history and by extension, Caribbean history. When you get to Form 3, if you so decide to go further with history, you would have a solid foundation that you could now build on. And when you get to themes such as revolutions and so on, you would have a greater context as to what happened in Grenada, in the Grenada Revolution, that now you could write in a more informed manner. Take, for example, you may have students who have been doing resistance and revolts and looking at revolutions and may have written extensively on the Haitian Revolution, the Cuban Revolution. Now, Grenada is the only country in this Western Hemisphere that is English speaking that has had a successful revolution.
Yeah.
Now, in this book written by Dr. Dow, Unit 6 speaks to Socialist Revolution, 1979 to 1983. So after having that kind of exposure at your Form 2 level, when you get to Form 3 and 4 and you start to delve into the CXC themes, you have more information. You have a good foundation that you could now build on, right? So this is why it's important for us. And outside of that, the student who may take, let's say, the business track or the technical track from Form 3 is going into these tracks, understanding who he is as a Grenadian, who he is as a Caribbean man in the context of his Grenadianness, right? He understands that well. So when our students engage with a Trinidadian, a Barbadian, a Jamaican, they'll be comfortable in their Grenadian skin to say, I am Grenadian, and this is why I am Grenadian, understanding that legacy, that history that you're carrying as a Grenadian.
Dr. Dow, is there anything else you wish to add to what Mr. James just said? About that Grenadianism, that sense of Grenadian identity?
Yes.
Yeah.
It's important. It is important. A student who has branched off into, let's say, the natural sciences, for example, that student would have had their grounding in their Grenadian self. So that it's, I've seen it from students who've traveled and they come back and they say, Miss Phillip, you remember when you taught us about this? Because I was always a rogue in teaching and I didn't really stick to the curriculum a lot of the times. So many times I put in a lot of Canadian history.
You remind me of my my former, the greatest history teacher I've ever had, Mr. Ali Gill. Who was my history teacher in high school at the Presentation College. He was the same. He went rogue. So go ahead.
Yes. So they would come back to say, you taught us about, so we were doing the British and the French in the Caribbean. Yeah. And our lesson was outside of the classroom, going to see one of the fortifications. So this is your connection, and this is what happened with regard to Grenada. We did the Grenada Revolution when it was not on the syllabus. But having traveled outside of Grenada, they would come back to say, oh, you remember when we did this? It was so important because in my class at whatever university I was at, some questions came up on Grenada, and I was able to answer because, we had this talk, or we had this extra class where we talked about these things. So it's very important that our students feel that way. Grenada Revolution, I don't even think the 79 to 83, I don't even think we recognize the impact this revolution has had regionally and internationally, to the point where when students travel, this comes up in their syllabus. We're dealing with revolutions and socialist revolutions and so on. So they are able to speak with some level of authority on their own country's history. One of the other things was the questioning in the textbook. So whereas you would have very simple questions to recall certain things, part of it had to do with evaluating and analyzing as well, so that they learn these skills very early. So by the time they get to that C2 level, they would have had some idea of how to analyze, how to evaluate. What was important is telling them how to get historical information. So how does the historian find out? How do they get their evidence? So they're aware of that. So when it comes now to writing their SPAs, they have a clear idea of what is a primary source, what is a secondary source, How is a bibliography written? All of those things are actually in the textbook, and it's a form of introducing them very early in the game to these things. So it makes it easier at the CSEC level.
Now, you mentioned, I'm going to bring back Mr. James here. You mentioned the Grenada Revolution. One of the disappointing observations I've made in recent. Anytime I interact with a Grenadian youth of a certain age, shall we say the post-97 Grenadian youth, and you ask them about the Grenada Revolution, it you know, they can only tell you about Maurice Bishop and that he was killed on October 19th, 1983. And that is the extent of it, right? You know, that there isn't that, which again contradicts just the significant volume of work that has been written. And as an example, I have, this is part of my Grenadian volume here. This is just part of it. I have another maybe 25 Grenadian books on one of my bookshelves. A lot of it. So the Grenada Revolution, written by Dr. Grenade, of course, George Brizan's Grenada Island of Conflict, where he talks about the Grenada Revolution. And then we have all of Bernard Cord's volumes, all of his 3 volumes on the Grenada Revolution. And of course, we have one of Eric Williams's texts here, from Columbus to Castro, where you know, the Grenada Revolution is mentioned in the context of socialist revolution. So the question I have for you, both of you, how do we get our students to be able to access that vast volume of literature, not only on the revolution, but the vast volume of literature that we have on Grenadian history in general, beyond that Form 3 level? Mr. James?
Dr. Bob, this is a very interesting part of it.
Yes.
And I would say to you 2 things. One, all of these texts must become readily available locally. Now, you can go on Amazon and find them.
Yeah.
But if you go into every bookstore in St. George's, you may not. There's also one written by Teddy Victor. There's one Comrade Lane wrote some time ago. Yeah, that's right. So we have to make them available. You must be able to walk into the bookshop and get the local history. That's 1. 2, we need to shift in our mindsets. And I would say this, for each of us, the Grenada Revolution impacted us differently. There are those who had pleasant experiences from the revolution. There are those who have had negative experiences from the revolution. But the fact is, the Grenada Revolution happened.
Yeah.
Now, it is a revolution that was not even as bloody as the American Revolution.
Yeah.
And America celebrates its history. And it's a bloody history as compared to ours. We need to start to share. Dr. Dow spoke about different sources. We have some of the primary sources around. Some of the men and women who were part and parcel of this, the men and women who planned and executed this, they need to start to talk. If they don't want to write, get somebody who can write and share the story. Let us have the interviews as to what happened during the period. So then maybe the Grenadian youth who is not inclined to reading a text that is 200 or 400 and something pages may go onto social media, may go onto TikTok and get a clipping done by, let's say, Lester Redhead, done by somebody of significance. Bernard Code is still alive. Yes, he's writing. But let us get some primary information that the wider population could engage with, that we understand what were, and we placed in a position where we could do a proper analysis of the positives, the negatives, that we able to inform our development going forward. Because it's clear to us, those of us who do the assessment, that we were marking time for a number of years in Grenada after the revolution.
Yeah.
The revolution took us to a place where we were advancing, but because it was socialist and communist, that is not what certain powers wanted. So there was a deliberate effort to destroy that and to destroy everything relating to that, right? I always say one of the reasons why Osama bin Laden had to be buried in the sea is because if he was buried on land, somebody may have made him a hero, because you could go to that spot and
there
say,
would be a
this is the
shrine.
burial.
There
There'll
would be a shrine. Yeah. To
right?
him.
Now we as a people, as a Grenadian people, must understand and must appreciate that those who came here in 1983 had their own agenda. And their agenda was to ensure that there's nothing socialist, nothing communist within this region, right? Outside of Cuba, because they've tried there, but nobody else should come like that, right? So in all of that, they have done certain things to erase that part of our history. But while those who made that history, while they are alive, it's important for them to write or get somebody to write, but tell the stories. Let's record it, that our people become aware as to what happened and they can do the necessary analysis.
Dr. Dow, I see you nodding here. I believe you agree with that. You endorse.
Yes, I definitely endorse. Recent history is difficult history to write. And in the case of the Grenada Revolution, as Mr. James mentioned, there's so many sides and so many people still hurt because of the revolution. So I've had students come to have an interview with me about the revolution, and they're like, but when I ask so-and-so, they don't want to talk about it, or they're not interested in speaking to me. And I have to remind them that recent history sometimes is hard, especially when people have been hurt by it. But it does not give us the excuse not to talk about it and not to write it, because it would be a disservice to the next generation, to the current generation and to the next generation, if we don't document it. So the people who are still around, who would have experienced the revolution, it really is a call to them to document what they know, as much and as far as possible. Actually, for me, that was the hardest chapter to write, because it is current history, and because there's been so much hurt, there's been so much pain. So one person you're going to get pure joy from, and someone else somebody's just going to react by withdrawing. So but it's our responsibility for the generations that come after us to know the good, the bad, and the ugly about the Grenada Revolution, and we can't just hide it under a bushel and pretend that it didn't happen. That does not work at all. We have to talk.
It does not. And speaking of hiding history, I'm going to share this this article because in reflecting on this program today, one of the again, the theme in which I decided to frame this was around decolonization. And I have to say that we have come a long way from the period of the royal readers, which we have come a long way from that period. But I wish to draw your attention to a dissertation that was done by Valerie Joseph, who completed that dissertation at Smith's College. The title of the dissertation was "How Thomas Nelson and Sons Royal Readers Textbooks Help Instill the Standards of Whiteness into Colonized Black Caribbean Subjects and Their Descendants." Now, in her body of work, let me get to the page. I believe it was on page 150. Let me check it here. Right, and by the way, her dissertation, her research focused on Grenadian students of the period of the 50s, 60s, and 70s who read the Royal Readers. But one of the things she said, and I will get to the question, I promise you, I'm going somewhere with this, ladies and gentlemen. In reader number 4, which is one of the volumes of the Royal Readers, of course, people of a certain generation would remember the Royal Readers. It's an examination of the content shows that they contain British history, general history and moral lessons, poems and stories about countries foreign to the British, and stories about nature. Among all of the topics, there is an almost complete omission of the existence of African or African heritage people. In 93 stories, exercises, or poems found in this volume, Africa is referred to one time and then only incidentally in a poem and story about a colonial European British shipwreck that took place off the coast of Africa. Of course, as for some context, the Royal Reader was one of the, I suppose, historic slash social history slash social studies textbooks that Grenadian students during the colonial era had to read. I'm not too sure when that ended, but I'm so glad I was not exposed to the Royal Reader. But I just want to I just want to reflect on how far we have come from that era. But fundamentally, how do we incorporate our African indigenous history? And I believe, Dr. Dow, you touched on that earlier, but our African indigenous history, because we also have to appreciate that Grenadian history is also African history. It's African, it's interrupted African history. As one of the commenters said, here, can we as a people also delve into our hidden West African history? It's interesting that our history always seems to begin with Christopher Columbus. Why can't we dig into where we came from? Dr. Nicole?
Yes. Interestingly, that was one of the things that I insisted on putting in the textbook. And it would have come from, I guess, the perspective of writing it that way came from my former teacher, who was Grenadian. He would have passed on, Dr. Fitzroy Batiste. And one of the things he said to us in our African history class at UWI was that the West African who came to the Caribbean came with his history, he came with his culture, he came with his stories, he came with everything. Yes, he may have been coming naked in terms of clothing or very little clothing, but he came with all of his historical experiences, all of his history in his mind. And the colonialism that he would have had to endure meant that he had to put it on a back burner, not talk about it as much as possible so that he does not upset the slave owner. But it does not mean that it did not exist, one, and two, it doesn't mean that he didn't find ways and means to pass it on. So in the chapter that I deal with enslavement, the first thing I talk about is pre-arrival in the Caribbean. What was Africa like? Yep. So we talk about Ghana, Mali, and Songhai. We talk about Mansa Musa, who was the richest man alive in his time, with camel filled with gold that he's moving from one part of West Africa to the next. I speak to them about Egypt as being a part of Africa, because sometimes when you look at the news, you start to get very confused as to where Egypt really is. And so
the pyramids are in Africa.
Yes, they are.
And it's probably one of the only things that the colonizers didn't steal because they couldn't physically move it.
Couldn't move it.
They would have...
Exactly. So you have to raise that point, that West Africa, you have East Africa with Egypt, you have Southern Africa with Zimbabwe. Looking at these persons as people who came with a historical past, with very intricate political systems, economic systems, cultural and social systems, so that they're not coming into the Caribbean as if nothing existed for them before. They're coming from well-structured societies. That was one aspect of it. And then towards the end of the chapter, I try to look at the legacies, things that we still have that have ties us to West Africa, even words that we say and we don't realize that they're African.
Mannerisms, yeah.
And our mannerisms, of course. And you will never say that I pierced my foot, I juke my foot. But that is, the word juke is a West African word, the things that we eat, of course, the way that we comb, we do our hair, all of those connections to Africa. So I thought it was important that our students know of these connections. Extremely important that they do.
Mr. James, that African connection, and in many respects, I believe there is also a need for us to free our minds in respect of the prejudices that we have of our own ancestry. There is a lot of anti-African bias in Grenada still. By the spiritual Baptists and the Shangos and so on, they to me are some of the people that carry on our African traditions in its purest form. But we discriminate against our spiritual Baptist brothers and sisters in many respects.
Dr. Bob, you're so right, because you're so correct on that. Because while Dr. Dow was speaking, my mind went there. That one of the things that we have today, which is reflective of that African ancestry and that connection, is the religion, the spiritual Baptists, the way that they're clad, the tying of the wrapping of the head, and the dance and the ceremony and so on. Now, of course, that came into conflict with Christianity, because our European colonizers came as Christians, and we have to accept that one of the messages of Christianity was to ensure that it was known that everything outside of Christianity was barbaric, was ungodly. So even if, for example, excuse me, the Moors, for example, invaded, and the Moors back then were the Muslim people of North Africa, controlled a reasonable part of Europe for years, right? You wouldn't hear about that, because what they were doing, that was sacrilegious. So we have to look at it. When we examine Carriacou and the culture in Carriacou, they roll cuckoo and they roll rice, the big drum, right? The very way that the people live, what they plant, and so on. It's reflective of our African ancestry. We talk about stories, Jombi, Beanansi, Kompe Zaye, Kompe Tig. These are not European stuff. This is rooted in our African ancestry. I think one of the things that is going to work for us now is the fact that there's an awakening now in Africa. And we have begun to see our Caribbean leaders recognizing that there's an economic link that they need to establish with West Africa. And once this starts to grow, that what you might call these days South-South dialogue, I think we would have a greater exchange. We should have a flight moving from the Caribbean directly to somewhere in West Africa.
Several flights.
Miami. Several
not
flights.
Up to Miami or England, yes.
Right, that's right. That we could connect, as we say, to the motherland. Because I want, you see, Dr. Dow touched on something. She spoke about Mansa Musa. But how many of us knew that in the pilgrimage that Mansa Musa made, because of the amount of gold that he shared along this pilgrimage, the price of gold on the international market, on the world market, dropped? Because everybody had gold that this man gave to them. This great king of Africa, right? The Queen of Sheba engaged with this man, right? When you look at the University of Timbuktu, where the pharaohs were sent to be educated, right? So clearly, Africa is the cradle of civilization. And we came from there. Our ancestors came from there. And we must engage with Africa, that we get that full connection, that full understanding as to who we are as a Caribbean people. And thankfully, I think Africa is moving in that direction to unite as Africa, as Bob Marley say, Africa unite. And the Caribbean has begun to engage with Africa in a more meaningful way. So I think that augurs well for us, and us getting our people to connect with that ancestry.
Absolutely. Dr. Dow, is there anything else you wish to piggyback on here? You spoke about that, those South-South connections. That is one of the remits of the Grenada and the CARICOM National Reparations Commission and committees. So if you want to add anything here, you can chime in now.
I think for me, I would like to see where we can have students. Students do exchange programs in some universities and some colleges, where we can get to the point where we have our students doing an exchange with students in West Africa, and they're coming to the Caribbean, so that they can see the linkages and they can see the connections, things that they may have read about in a book, that they can actually see, feel, and experience these connections. I remember my own going to Senegal, going to Gorée Island, feeling weighed down when I went into the cells that would have held the enslaved, trying on one of the shackles and wondering how in heaven's name did someone make it across alive to the Caribbean under those conditions. So some of these experiences you would really like students to actually have. I think that would be very, very, very important.
I'm glad you mentioned that, because I recently had that experience on my trip to Ghana this summer. I visited both the Cape Coast and the Elmina castles, and that was an extremely powerful, poignant experience.
Yes.
And I believe everyone in the Caribbean space should experience that, because when we think about the period of colonialism and slavery, it still seems to be this remote idea of something that happened a long time ago. It's really not a long time ago. We are just a few generations removed from that, So any closing comments? We have to get to our next segment here. Any closing comments? Anyone? Dr. Dow, you want to go first?
Just to say that I want the students to really enjoy the text, and I look forward to engaging with them, to hear their comments and to hear their feedback. That would be very important. Things that they may want to see in a next version, you never know. But it will be interesting to hear how the students actually feel about the textbook once they interact with it. Yes.
Yeah, I look forward to that. Mr. James, before I get to you, and speaking of history, I have a surprise here for you, sir. I believe you probably know what it is, but I'm going to share this photo.
Oh my goodness.
Dr. Bubb, for years I searched for this photo.
Yes.
I keep saying there's a photo somewhere with Dr. Kellon Bubb, myself, and Dr. Mitchell.
Yes.
Grenada Trade Center.
That was at the Trade Center, and I believe that was one of the Gospel Fest events.
Yes, Gospel Splash.
Probably in the early 2000s. Gospel Splash. Yes. But I thought I would share that. So, Dr. Mitchell, if you're watching, just
a meeting of the K's.
A meeting of the K's. The KKK, not in the racial context here. Keith, Kenny, and Kellen.
I'm Kellen.
I just thought I would share that. I just thought I would share that here. But Brother Kenny, over to you for some final comments, sir.
Dr. Bubb, thank you for having us. And first of all, I want to say thanks to my colleague, Dr. Dow, for the work that she's placed into this text. And I want to encourage our students to read it, to enjoy it. I want to encourage parents, because many of our parents don't know our local history either. So I want to encourage parents also. It's a nice read. You're going to enjoy it. It's not boring. You're going to enjoy it, and you're going to enjoy discussing it, because you have an opportunity as a parent to speak to what you are aware of in the context of what's written for grandparents, and so to engage with children. Grenada has a rich history. You have to remember the mighty Sparrow was born in Grenada, king of Calypso. Uriah Butler one of the, if not the most prominent trade unionists of all times, was born in Grenada. Henry Christophe, King of Haiti, was born in Grenada. So when we talk about the Haitian Revolution, please note that a Grenadian stood as king in Haiti, right? It was one of the first places where a governor was executed, right? We were the first island in the small islands to become independent. So St. Lucia, St. Vincent, Dominica, they followed after us. In recent times, we've looked at the whole issue of reparation. We mentioned today the fact that we're the only successful English-speaking revolution in the Western Hemisphere. And the list goes on. We have a colorful, a beautiful history that we must embrace as a Grenadian, because this is what is going to help us to develop our Grenadian identity, that national identity. It will help us to foster that spirit of patriotism and nationalism, help us to understand our culture of festivals and so on, and where we are placed in the Caribbean, as a Caribbean man, understanding our Caribbean identity. So I want to encourage all of us to engage with this material. Let's start a conversation about who we are as Grenadians, and let's move forward.
And a very important addendum and footnote here that I wish to bring up. Dr. Grave Sandy saying, I wish to respectively recommend for consideration of the panel that there should now be structured and intentional engagement with the history departments of two of our leading regional universities, namely the University of Guyana and UWI, and utilizing the professional competencies to energize the appreciation and teaching of history across the region. Shouldn't we also provide incentives among our regional students to appreciate the love of our history and want them to pursue the study of history? But I thought that is an important addendum there. But also we talk about books and publications, but I believe film is also another important way of bringing history alive. We do have the Grenada Film Festival that is put on by Mashida Phillip. I believe that is also an excellent avenue where we can tell, for example, disaggregate the story around the revolution. The June 19th bomb blast, for example, that can be a film series. The night when it all happened, looking at what Ewan Lade wrote, that could be an entire movie. You know what I mean? So there are many opportunities beyond the book to bring that history alive as well. So we have another
and just to say, Dr. Bubb,
yes, go ahead.
As a consolation to Dr. Grave Sandy, the task force, I would say, begun that because Dr. Melissa Eiffel from University of Guyana was part of that task force. UWI was also involved. Dr. Kumar Mahibe from University of Trinidad and Tobago. So there's some people who are at the table, and so what we need to see is a continuation of that kind of engagement to ensure that it's across the region.
All right, absolutely. Dr. Nicole Phillip Dow and Mr. Kenny James, Comrade James, thank you both for joining us for this segment of the program. Viewers and listeners, we will take a quick break and we will come back with the second panel segment of the week. Please stand by.
There's nothing good about jail. I don't want to be here.
My father told me that as far as he was concerned, I could stay in the home forever.
Our children deserve a chance for change. Children make mistakes, and child justice reform can help everyone to address these mistakes appropriately. Instead of sending a child to adult prison, let us give them alternative sentencing. We must divert our children from the court system through a holistic and systematic approach to addressing their offense and their road to rehabilitation. Rehabilitation helps child offenders to grow, change, learn from mistakes, accept responsibility, and make better choices. Reintegration of child offenders into the community after rehabilitation benefits the child, the family, and the community with a more productive citizen. Join the movement to give our children a chance for change. This message is brought to you by the USAID OECS Juvenile Justice Reform Project 2, funded by the United States Agency for International Development. For more information, log on to oecs.org/JJRP.
Should your loved ones pass on, they deserve to be treated with dignity. And at S.A. Johnson Funeral Home, we can provide you with that service. We can take you every step of the way during your sorrowful moments. When that need arises, call S.A. Johnson Funeral Home at 347-777-9797. That's 347-777-9797. S.A. Johnson Funeral Home is a Caribbean family-owned funeral home here in Brooklyn, providing funeral services, but in a dignified way. From cremation to burial to the repatriation of your loved ones, you don't have to go through the hassle, as we provide exceptional service that allows you to mourn and heal peacefully. For more information, visit our website, www.sajohnsonfuneral.org. Send us an email at sajfuneral@aol.com or call 347-777-9797. S.A. Johnson Funeral Home, because you deserve to be treated with dignity.
Spice out, call Grenada.
My name is Crystal Simeon, and I am the owner of Island Learning Grenada. A bit about myself. I am a Grenadian, born and raised in Grenada from the Virgin Parish of St. David. I have lived in Grenada for most of my life. I was educated in Grenada and moved to Canada in 2013 and have been living in Western Canada for the last 10 years. At Island Learning Grenada, we are focused on educating on everything Grenadian. Special offering for members of the Grenadian diaspora. You can contact us on 473-535-4745, or you can register for our personalized webinars on our website, www.islandlearning.gd. Once you sign up, we'll send an email communication to you once you register on our website. Grow your love, passion, commitment, connection. 2473. Bye.
Viewers and listeners, welcome back to this episode of the Bubb Report. Now, in the last couple of weeks, there has been a significant narrative around criminality in Grenada and the increasing crime rates that we have been seeing in Grenada. One of the subtexts, one of the sub-narratives around that conversation has to do with the demographic that are committing these crimes. A lot of people who you find are committing these crimes tend to be young people in the 18 to 30 demographic. In fact, outgoing magistrate Teddy St. Louis, who was the chief magistrate in Grenada, expressed concern at the significant and alarming number of juveniles who were being brought before the court for matters of criminal adjudication. And that is a concern that he has expressed. Now, notwithstanding that you do have facilities in Grenada, you do have places like Nulo, you do have even within the corrective facilities, whether that's at Bailey's Bacolet or Grand Bacolet, or whether that's at the Richmond Hill Prison, they do have rehabilitative services there. But in spite of those rehabilitative services, many young people still fall through the cracks and turn to a life of crime. And here to make sense of these challenges that young people continue to confront of a particular demographic in Grenada, Mr. Andy Matthew, who is a Grenadian social worker, and Mr. Curlin Campbell, who is an investigative journalist and who wrote an article about the Juvenile Rehabilitation Center to Prison Pipeline in Grenada. So I want to welcome you, gentlemen, to the Bubb Report.
Good morning and thank you.
Absolutely. It's so good to have you here, gentlemen. Just let me fix your title here, Curlin, because you're here in a different capacity today. I just did that. Okay. And Mr. Matthew, this is your first time on the Bubb Report, so I want to welcome you as well. But I want to begin, Mr. Matthew, with you. Let us start by talking about the positives. Let us talk about how resilience. Let us talk about how a number of young people in Grenada who are faced with some very tough life circumstances are able to overcome and find their way on the path to the straight and narrow.
Okay. Yes. Well, the problems that we face in Grenada, I believe, with working with the young people, a lot of them, it stems from poverty. And I would say structure. But when you speak to them, they are willing to work and make changes in their life. However, the environment that they're in is making it a little bit difficult for them to do so. We've worked with a number of young people who have passed through the juvenile system, and I'm still in touch with them. Some of them have moved on to occupations and are keeping themselves out of trouble. I have a young man who's now a barber who is very popular in the St. George's area. We have young people who's involved in youth and trying to open up community groups to actually help other people like themselves. So in terms of that, despite all what they are going through, they are really trying to make a difference, not just for themselves, but others that they see in the same position.
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm. Absolutely. So that's working there. Let me bring in Curlin. Curlin, I believe I believe it was last year, you wrote an article about that pipeline that exists for a number of young people who fall through the cracks. Now, what are some of the factors you believe that continue to contribute to that engendering of criminality in the society, especially within that particular demographic of young people?
Right. Also, just to clarify as well, when we look at that demographic, we see that predominantly males are the ones coming into conflict with the law. One of the statistics that I looked at was the prison statistics, and it had over 340 something inmates, and out of that, only 3 females were at the prison, and that was the stats coming out from earlier this year. So I looked at that, and I realized that something is wrong, but then it has to stem from somewhere. So I also looked at, who are the young people who are failing at our primary schools, and I noticed as well that there is a correlation. Young men are underperforming at the primary schools, and a matter of fact, they make up a large majority of those retained at the primary schools. So I wanted to show that there is a correlation between what is happening with our education system and what is happening with the criminal justice system as well. So you mentioned, you asked me some of the factors. In order for us to fully flesh out the problem, we first need to understand it. One of the things I realized is that in Grenada, we treat symptoms of the problem and not the disease in and of itself. And what makes it even worse is that we treat symptoms in isolation of each other. So crime, sexual crimes and violence and drugs and all the other societal ills, we treat them separate, not realizing that it all comes from one source. I also looked at the family structure and the breakdown of the family structure. And that's intentional, by the way. It is not something that just happened by chance. And when you look at the family structure and you realize that we have normalized single parent households, especially headed by females. And when it comes to females raising boys, that becomes quite difficult. Now, mothers do a fantastic job, and we must give them credit for that.
But when you say normalize, I mean single parent households. Wasn't that always a phenomenon?
Well, you see, but it had to start from somewhere.
Okay.
And when you look at let's say the 1950s and 60s, just take the US for example, you really start seeing the rise of single parent households. Shortly after the 60s and the 70s, most of the 70s and the 80s with the crack epidemic. We also have to look at what's the Grenadian situation. We also start seeing single parent, exploding in the 90s as well. When you look at the statistics, we have normalized it because that's not supposed to be normal.
Right.
You get me, right?
Yes.
Right. When you look at how single mothers raise their boys, the mere fact that boys are not receiving discipline in the home, not the mother's fault because she's in a terrible situation, it's just the dynamics of what will happen when there is no masculine energy in that home. Young boys tend to grow up without discipline and expecting that life should be easy because the mother has nurtured them to believe that life is like that. And it's actually the opposite to how they treat their daughters. So their daughters are allowed to do all the work in the house. There's consequences to bad behavior for the daughters, but for the sons, there isn't. That becomes problematic. So move out from the family now, and that could flesh out in a whole nother set of topics. But let's move on to our education system. I believe that our education system is preparing our young people for poverty. That's just my belief. And I'll tell you the reasons why. I have a definition of what education should be. Education is one that should teach historically accurate information that is culturally relevant, that caters to the individual learning styles of students, and it meets the needs of an ever-evolving technological society. Based on my definition, I'm not seeing our education system playing that part. Kellen, just give me a few minutes again just to flesh out what a true education should actually, give our students. African history and spirituality, number one. Number two, political science. Political science and also self-defense. Number three, we must understand not only agriculture, but agronomy. How do we use plants for food, fuel, fiber, meaning material, cotton or whatever, and furniture, how we build houses. Four, education should develop our cognitive and reasoning skills. It's not doing that. Five, group economics, working together for one common goal. Education is supposed to do that. Right now, we're individualistic in the way education has cultured us into to be selfish. And the final thing, which is most important, now, if you don't have none of the things that I just said before, you must have these things. One, understanding investment. And I'm talking from the primary level. Come up. Understanding investment, real estate, taxes, the monetary system, entrepreneurship, and also how to prepare for retirement. Based on those factors, our education system receives a failing grade when it comes to that, because I want to create an individual who is independent, an independent thinker, and someone who could overcome challenges. These are the reasons why we see a lot of young men failing, because education is not tailored specific to males now. It's more catered to females. You're following me, Kellen?
That is a very controversial statement you made there.
I know, but let's look at it. And Kellen, just let's be clear here. Boys, we have testosterone, so we are energetic. We cannot be sitting down and listening to a boring lecture. That is not how we learn as a people. We are people of rhythm, especially men with testosterone. We like to move. We like to use our hands. Education should be tailored around that, the dynamics of how we learn. And that's just my personal opinion.
Okay.
Yes.
No, absolutely. But I want to bring back Mr. Matthew here. Now, Mr. Matthew, in preparing for today's program, one of the articles that I stumbled upon was a housing crisis for teens that are aging out of group homes. Of course, just to give viewers context, children who end up in group homes tend to come from dysfunctional homes. Some of them are orphaned. Some of these children experience some extremely challenging life circumstances. But one of the points that this article was making, and that was written by an intern that's associated with the nonprofit in Grenada, Reach Within. was that that particular housing crisis. So when those children are aged out of the group home setting, there are no support systems and safety nets for them. They live under people's houses. They live in abandoned homes, and so as a result of those dynamics, some of them turn, according to the article, have the potential of turning to crime and deviant behavior in the society. Can you speak to the extent of that issue in Grenada?
Okay, I do see that that is a major problem at the moment. I know they are looking into it and trying to put things in place to avoid this happening. But I have experienced a number of young people who have come through the system, finished baccalaureate and group home, and they turn 18 and they have no relationships with their family because they were under a care order. So they've been in that group home or at baccalaureate for extensively long period, and work hasn't been done in terms of actually bringing the family back together. So when this child leaves, he now has to basically fend for himself because we haven't got the facilities. I'm not saying that it's not something that they don't want to do. I would say that it's something that we need to put more emphasis into in terms of finding, like, I guess in America and out there, they would call them like halfway houses, where this child can come and learn independent living skills. So the transitioning is better. And if the child is involved in education and is doing all these things, then maybe a subsidy so he can actually go out and find somewhere to rent if we're unable to provide. And at the moment, I don't think that they are looking enough into this at the moment. We haven't got the resources for this. So it is a big problem. And as a matter of fact, 2 weeks ago, I did have a call from a young man who I worked with in the past. And I was so upset because he was basically telling me at the moment he's on his own. He has nowhere to stay. Sometimes he sleeps at a friend's house. But he also showed me where he was living, and it was absolutely like abysmal. And he pointed out that his brother, who is older than him, was within the system, and he is also homeless. A lot of the times, when the children start transitioning and going into 18, their behavior would change and they want that sense of independence. And sometimes the homes that they're in might have a few rules that might be a bit hard for them to adhere to, especially with the trauma they experience throughout their life. And them feeling at this age, becoming a man or a woman, I should be making more of my decisions. If I would like to go out, I should be able to go out and speak to them and do as I please, but then the home would have their rules. So at that age, some of these young people would move on prior to any work being done. They'll start staying by a friend because they feel more comfortable at the friend than being at the home where they're being treated as a child, even though they are. But in them, they're thinking, well, I'm growing now, so I need a little bit more responsibility. I mean, at home, if you're at home with your parents, when you're younger, you get the chance to go out, but they limit your time. As you get older, they expand on the time and say, okay, well, you can stay out later, Andy. Maybe you could come home 9 o'clock instead of 8 o'clock. And according to them, there's not much of that leeway for them. And they tend not to want to be in the group homes. But if they do provide them with semi-independent living where they can probably have a worker coming in and teaching them, the essentials, maybe cooking and, how to pay for a bill and how to set up an account and do those things with them and walk them through it. But at the same time, they have their place that they are in charge of and responsible for. We need more of that in the system. And it's not just from the government. Maybe individual need to look privately into investing into something like that to help the youths of Grenada.
Life skills. Now, what would you say would be the consequences of not having those social safety nets in place?
Well, I'll speak from the young man I spoke to recently, and he was saying He enrolled in a NULO bartending course.
Yes.
However, he couldn't complete it because there was days when he had no money and couldn't eat, so he couldn't even go to school to concentrate. Him feeling a bit insecure due to the fact that he doesn't have anything, and he believes that the other children are seeing that and they're stigmatizing him, and it doesn't make him even feel comfortable to be in that environment. So it's a very difficult process that these young people are going through on their own. They have no one to actually talk to because their families, they're estranged from their family, and it's been so long that it's very difficult for them to build those relationships after coming from the home.
Yeah, absolutely. Mr. Campbell, I would bring you back here. Now, in an article that you wrote with the Caribbean Investigative Journalism Network, you sort of questioned the profit that there might be, or questioned whether or not there was a juvenile justice to prison pipeline. Can you flesh that out and articulate what you meant by that, especially among the youthful population that Mr. Andy just spoke about here?
Yeah, well, all right, so it's connected with some of the things that I said before. If we have dysfunctional infrastructure, the systems that are supposed to protect and educate our young people are not effectively doing it, then all right, let me give an example. So within my article, looked at a young man who I would not name because he was a juvenile, he was young, so I would not mention his name. Where he grew up, I came from that same community. And that community was riddled with crime and violence from ever since. That community also did not have a functioning community center. Hurricane Ivan destroyed the library. There were no after-school programs or activities for young people. So what do you expect young people to do? They come from dysfunctional homes where single parent, the mothers are unable to control the sons because boys are allowed to go out, do what they want. These are the things that are setting up our children for poverty and eventually to enter into our prisons because they will commit crimes. If we have a society where we are flashing a lot of vanity and stuff in people's faces and you're poor and you have no means to get those things that will make you feel good, what are you left to do, Kellen? So these are some of the factors that we have to address in our society in order for us to see that dynamic change, especially in our males. Now, I'm not saying that females don't commit crimes, but what I'm saying, based on the stats that I've received, young men are predominantly at our prisons at this very moment.
But the point you're making is, yes, and of course, Magistrate St. Louis also alluded to that as well, because he was in the article, based on what he said in court when he retired as a magistrate, was that there was just a significant amount of juveniles, young people, who are getting into the system. Now, Mr. Matthews, speaking of that, what is your role as a social worker, for example, in steering these young people away from those challenges of crime that they would eventually end up into?
Well, my role as a social worker is basically I would advocate on behalf of these young people for better opportunities, and at the same time try and analyze what they are going through and give them kind of ideas on how they can go through it in a positive way. The frustration that they're going through on the street, what I tend to say to them, because a lot of them, they're so frustrated that they don't want to go back into education. They want to go and find a job because these are the issues that they're having: money, and they need food, they need clothes, they need to go places. So they tend to don't see education as an important factor. And I keep reminding them that, when you're young and you're 15, 16, 17, 18, it's okay having a low education and, you're getting money to get by. But as you grow older and you have more responsibility, you would need to command maybe a larger wage because you might start having family and more responsibility. So I try to encourage them on finding ways to actually improve their life skills in terms of not just education in terms of books, but in terms of learning skills, in terms of, looking at themselves and seeing what they want from themselves. Because a lot of the time they get the emphasis from society and they forget what they want. they think about, oh, what Mr. Andy thinks of me, or what this teacher thinks of me, or what my mother thinks of me. And it kind of makes them lose focus and kind of get confused. So with society, what we need is money to survive. So these children are learning this from a very young age. The monetary value is from maybe because parents are saying they don't have money every time things has to happen. So they understand there's a need for money. They don't understand the need for education. They don't understand the need for training. And I think these are the things that we need to emphasize with them. In order for this to happen, you need to put yourself in this position. You're now young, you can educate yourself and train yourself. So later on in life, you can actually do something and contribute to society. So that tends to be my role with working with them.
Okay. What are some other challenges you're seeing, you're on the ground in respect of juveniles and young people in Grenada that you feel that authorities need to address, whether that's at the governmental level, other civil society institutions, and so on?
I think the biggest thing is opportunities. Change comes from opportunities. You make changes when you get an opportunity to make the change. We can't expect these children to change and do all this work with them, and then we are not offering them opportunities when they go out and expect them to sustain the change that they started. So one of the things I think we need to improve on is giving opportunities to young people. And most communities, St. Patrick, I live in St. Patrick's. We have a number of community centers in St. Patrick's, but there is no organized programs, maybe for after school, where we can steer these young people. So when they finish school, they would stand on the side of the road with their friends and laugh and joke, or, and a lot of the times is negative. Some of them start smoking, some of them start drinking, some of them, So if we have more programs, I would say, after school programs that actually interest the young people, not just having afternoon programs, but you properly assess the situation to know the needs of the young people. And we start meeting the youth of the needs. I believe that we'll have a more effective change on them by giving them these opportunities.
Mr. Campbell, is there anything else you wish to add here to what Mr. Matthew articulated?
Yeah, I totally agree with everything that he stated. Actually, he was actually featured in the article from a social worker perspective, and also working from the Grand Bacolet Juvenile Center. There's one thing I want to add in the comments section, because I'm reading the comments as well. I specifically stated that is from my observation and from my deliberative research that I've done. Now, if we want to flesh out a problem, we need to first do extensive research, and extensive research has not been done, particularly for the Grenadian context, to understand the unique problems that we face. So I'd say that the people who are saying that, where's my empirical evidence, then you do some research and come up with solutions, because some of the times I think we are so far removed from the communities, and I am on the ground. For instance, one of the things that I did for that article, I went and interviewed single parent mothers, and I get a perspective as to how they raise their children. That's one of the things that I had to do for that article. Another area of concern for me was looking at the CPEA results and seeing that for the past 6 or 7 years, and I went back further, back to 10 years, but it's quite irrelevant because there was a pattern that males were predominantly failing. Why are they failing? And the link, and it also shows that there is a link between them failing and them entering into the prison, because the young man that I featured in that article came from a dysfunctional home, did not attain passes did not in his secondary life, dropped out of school. And when you listen to his story and you hear some of the factors that led him to do that, it's cause for concern. So I would say that we need some extensive research being done into that. And I'm hoping that the people who are intellectuals will be able to do that extensive research.
For some reason, those comments, I'm actually going to read those comments because
Yes,
they're
please.
not showing up. They're not showing up on my StreamYard here. But
Miss Margaret Francis had a comment.
yeah. She had a comment here. She saying, "Don't know about Campbell's arguments. Where is the evidence? The difference in how we raise boys versus girls is not new and certainly not unique to Grenada. Rightly or wrongly, the world has been patriarchal." Yes, which is very true. What is the effect of the loss of the community and the extended family in raising children? Then we have another comment. Mr. Matthew, the viewer says, Mr. Matthew, you dare not leave a house empty in the town of St. George and its environs for at least a year. When you return, you will find uninvited guests. What do you suppose is the cause of this, Mr. Matthew? I mean, I can speak to that as someone who grew up on Four Roads. I go back to Four Roads and I don't recognize some of the people there. And some of the people there are actually occupying, shall we say, squatting, abandoned homes, Mr. Matthew.
Yes. And Four Roads has this kind of reputation. So there's a certain cohort of people who would gravitate to that. In terms of resolving the issues with housing and people occupying housing, I believe that I guess it's more to do with a social thing, and it's something that I cannot actually give you the answers for. We would have to do a lot more investigating into the reasons why. But obviously, if there's an issue in terms of young people not having places to stay, and they would, that I know for a fact that a lot of the times they would tell me that, you know, there was a house, nobody was in it, so I stayed there. And people would complain they eat their food or something like that. They don't steal anything major, but they would eat their food and live there for a couple of days and move on. I know that's an issue, and maybe if the different agencies that work with young people, CPA, social services, start looking more into the situation, they might actually be able to come up with issue. And another thing is the semi-independent properties where we can place our young people. If we have that readily available, then they would have somewhere to stay. And rather than going and squat in somebody's house, which I'm not condoning and saying it's right at all, then they can actually move to
halfway
somewhere.
homes. Yeah. Absolutely. Nicole James Phillip is saying, this is tough. Imagine leaving the rehabilitation center at 18 and 19, no job, nowhere to go, and employers most likely discriminating after they were hearing that they were resident of the Grand Bacolet Rehabilitation Center. What is in place for that? Mr. Matthew?
So at the moment, what we try to do now is at the center, the management and stuff are very much aware of these kind of problems that they are facing. And when we're working with the young people, we are now trying also to see if we can have outside agencies that can be referred to, so they would understand the situation where they come from and would not judge them. So we almost do an introduction to about the young person. So there's a full understanding of the person's background. There's nothing to hide. You're willing to accept them, give them the opportunity. And like I said, with opportunity, we get changes. If we don't offer them the opportunity, then the changes wouldn't come. So I think we have to re-educate maybe business owners and so forth, do some work with them and try and get them on board in the process of making change and transformation for these young boys and girls.
Absolutely. If there are other comments, I'm certainly going to get to them. Hudson George saying, of course, all cities have squatters. That's common globally. But one of the reasons why I felt it was important to have this program today is because there tend to be a moral panic whenever there is an upsurge in crime, right?
Yes.
Oh, well, you know, what is Grenada coming to? So much crime. What's going on here? We're going to hell in a handbasket, this, that, and the third. But you have to get to the source of the issues. This is one of the source of the problems. Would you not say, Mr. Matthew?
It is indeed. But even with getting to the source, it would take some time. And that's what people have to give is time. With time, we'll put things in place that would actually give us a better system to work with the young people. remember, in terms of us and social working and so forth, we are just on the brink of coming into it. I mean, in comparison to America, who has loads of resources, or England, where I work, loads of resources to help the young people, Grenada doesn't have that same. So I'm not blaming. I wouldn't like to put this blame game. I believe that we all have to work together in order to us to achieve what we want for our children and the future of our children.
Absolutely. This is a very important conversation that needs to continue to happen. And what we want to do now is to get to some closing comments. Mr. Campbell, I will start with you, Mr. Campbell. It's regretfully the article that you wrote, a very extensive article. Regretfully, the Caribbean Investigative Journalism's website, when I went back to get the article, it was down. Within a space of 24 hours. I don't know what happened there, but I would have loved to quote from that article, because I believe some extensive reporting was done there. Some great interviews was done there. But unfortunately, you need to reach out to those folks at Caribbean Investigative Journalism Network and see what they can do about retrieving that important extensive report that you did. But over to you, sir, for some closing comments.
Yeah, I think there's not much to be said. Like I said, we need to start treating the disease and not just symptoms. And we need to do extensive research on the ground, not just on, from a bird's eye view, but let's be on the ground to see what is the situation on the ground that is actually contributing towards the problem later down the line. Let's look at mental health. Young people, we actually treat mental health when it's too late. And that's when you get to the psychiatric ward. There's a lot of people I know suffer from mental health, and they're not being treated because we have the stigma where if you seek any treatment for mental health, then it's a taboo topic and there's some sort of discrimination. Also want to call on the churches. I think the churches could do much more than they're currently doing on a systematic level. I think that there are infrastructure that we need to build. We cannot always just depend on government to do everything. I think as a community, we could come together and...
Well, except the counter argument here, Mr. Campbell, is the churches would say that they are doing a lot, that that Grenada is becoming increasingly individualistic and secularized, and people cuss the churches and you disrespect the churches and whatnot. Sometimes they say, I do that too. But but the point is, the churches would say, well, we are doing all of those things. We have youth camps, we have crusades in which we attempt to mobilize people to turn to a life of Christ and so on. So you can't say that everybody wants to call on the churches to do more, but I believe that in all fairness to them, they have programs that in which they are assisting young people as well. I mean, you have NULO as well in the context of the Catholic Church. They're doing work. A lot of the group homes are also under the churches. Go ahead, Mr. Campbell.
Yeah, and you're right. Like I said, on a systematic level, I'm not just talking about individual churches doing particular things. I'm saying like as a body. For instance, and a lot of the time they're preaching to the converted. It almost seems that you have to be, Christianized in order to get help. For instance, I'll give an example. I was having a conversation with one of the gentleman who has an NGO, and he's actually working with young men at the prison. And one of the things that I said is that there are young men who are not Christians, but who also need this help and support. And while he said that, they're willing to support them, it almost seems that, they wanted that person to accept Christ. And I'm like, okay, well, that's...
Which is proselytizing, which should be criminalized, quite frankly. That's illegal.
Yeah, so it almost comes across like that. And I'm like, that shouldn't be, But anyway, like I said, we need to come together as a community to solve many of the problems that we have. And we cannot just depend on government to do it. So.
Absolutely. You're calling for a community-wide approach there to solving that issue. It takes a village. Mr. Matthew.
I totally agree with the points on having community come together, because I'm a strong believer in that. When I was growing up in Grenada, if I do something wrong when I was on the road and somebody saw me, they would pull me up and they would also tell my mom. So I would, by the time I get home, I'll get scolded at home, but I already was told outside. And I think that care within the community has been lost. And we need to start being our brother's keeper. We cannot only depend on government or the workers. We're human, and sometimes we wouldn't be able to actually meet the needs of everybody all the time. There's cases where, you know, children are probably being abused and the workers are not aware of the situation. Neighbors would just turn a blind eye and say, it's not my business. But we need to start making it our business. If we want change for the youths, as we say we do, we need to start making the changes within ourselves so it can reflect to the youths. We have the saying, monkey see, monkey do. Well, it's the same thing for children. If we start implementing the changes within us, the children in life would fall in line and it would help us a great deal. That doesn't mean that the government doesn't have to jump on board and all agencies involved to make it effective, but the community and individually, we need to take responsibility for the youths now.
Absolutely. But Mr. Matthew, the final comment I would make here as we put a bow on this segment is people like yourself, social workers. I have a friend who works in that social care setting. Well, two friends actually. You guys do yeoman's service. And sometimes I wonder how you engage in self-care for yourself, because you hear all of these very sad and depressing stories. What do you do for self-care?
For me, I've been working around young people for quite some time. I'm not saying that I'm immune to it, because it's something you can never, being a social worker, there's a certain quality that you have in terms of caring for others and wanting the best for others. I am happy to actually just sit on my own on the beach, or sometimes probably go around a friend. That's my self-care. I'm not into partying much as before or doing these things, but self-care for me is actually, just spending time with me and reflecting, being grateful. I've got young children as well that, what's happening out there can and do affect my children as well. And that's another reason why I tend to go out for the young people, because I always say to them, if you see my child on the street, I would love for you to pull them up if they're doing something wrong. We all have to be our brother's keeper. And I think with that, Grenada has always been a place. I mean, even the reviews in tourism, people always say that we are lovely people.
Yeah.
We are the most friendly people. So now we need to use that amongst ourselves, show our friendliness amongst ourselves, care for someone who's not in the position to care properly for others. That's what I think we should need to do more.
Absolutely. Mr. Matthew, thank you so very much. Mr. Campbell as well, thank you so very much. Just as a programming note, we also did invite a representative of the Grenada Child Protection Authority to appear on the program. We are yet to hear back from them, but we will be having a part 2 to this very important conversation in respect of juvenile justice in Grenada. But I want to thank Mr. Campbell and Mr. Matthew for starting this conversation here, and it's a conversation that we will continue to have. Now, some of you did ask, where can you get a copy of Dr. Dow's book on the first segment on the junior history of Grenada? The book is actually available on Amazon, and it has been available on Amazon from the 1st of October of this year. It's $32.99. In terms of availability in Grenada, I'm sure it would also be available at the local bookstores there on the island. But for those of you in the diaspora who use Amazon, it is available on Amazon. Junior History of Grenada, that's the title of the textbook. You can get your copy today on that site. Now, on behalf of the producers of the Bubb Report, I'm your humble servant, Dr. Kellen Bubb. We thank you for joining us this week for another episode, and we will see you next week. Take care. Bye-bye. Hi, everyone. Thanks for checking out the Bubb Report's social media pages. If you'd like to get more videos, show highlights, and watch our weekly live show, follow our Facebook, Twitter, and Instagram pages, and also subscribe to our YouTube channel. You can catch repeat episodes on Wednesdays at 4 and 5 p.m. respectively on CRFM Radio and GBN TV in Grenada. We are also viewed on Sundays at 8 p.m. on WPG 10 throughout the Caribbean. Thanks for watching.